Derek, I thought I might just open by asking you about your experience and how that led you into the design of the cyber range here in Adelaide.
Sure, how you going? Look, absolutely love the experience. We talk about desktop reviews, we talk about live fire, but to the videos and the other presentations around what Lock Shields is all about, it's very much absolutely engaging. You're very much in the trenches. There is pressure. People will get stressed. They'll get angry. They'll get upset. You'll have to take people aside. It is a full-on event. The really big positive thing that comes out of it, it does actually pressure test everybody in the teams. And you've got multidisciplinary environments having to look at things that are aged, Linux versions, infrastructure, different disciplines, right through to the last event that I went along to. There was vulnerabilities from 2 or 3 weeks prior to the event that it was actually incorporated within the actual range itself. So it's a full range of operations. Being able to, as displayed around, having to take service desk calls, interpret the service desk calls from the real business, interpret that, what it means to the technology and what the red team is currently still doing to you, and then repeat back to say, hey, the system's going to be up in this amount of time. So you're actually having to operate the business within the actual live fire event as well. Unique, really, really cool. Some of the things, I'd already started the design of the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre prior to going, but I've done ranges in the past. One of the biggest things that really comes to mind when it comes to taking the experiences of the range and of Lock Shields particularly was the complexity, the interoperability. Every layer is included. The business impact, so actually understanding the business and making, as we have here at the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre, a utility which can be used in many different ways. And in very much in the same sense, that's what Lock Shields is all about, is being able to utilise the environment, but it's about business outcome. It could be used from a desktop review right through to live fire, both passive and active in monitoring and so forth. It could be business process, desktop reviews, BCP, DR. The same type of concepts are there within the Lock Shields event as well. So incredibly valuable. And as Matthew said, I used some of the thoughts and some of those principles when designing and finalising the centre here.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Dave, by way of introduction, I thought it might be interesting to ask you about your experience in collaboration and working across countries and teams in this amazing cyberspace that we're now very much challenged by. I thought you might have some thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the thing to remember with cyberspace is that it connects all of us in different ways. And the experience that I've had working with NATO and other countries in the past is that being able to, on the one hand, manage those risks that emerge from both our dependencies and our increased use of cyber technologies. But on the other hand, we have a lot of shared values, a lot of experiences that we're able to basically engage with each other and build our knowledge. And I think one of the things that comes out of the presentations we've had today, the technology will continue to change. That's a given. What is the consistent piece is the education and the dialogue between all of our countries and our people. So if we can focus on that and opportunities where you can put people in a pressure test together as a learning environment is an invaluable way of building those relationships, because for those of you who will have worked with other people under pressure, you either walk away best friends or not so much, but you certainly get to know each other and you can communicate much better. So I think opportunities like that are things that we really need to double down on. And our personal observation is Australia, we're a little bit more aloof with a lot of those things, which is a variety of factors, including our geography. Whereas NATO, everyone's kind of next door to each other. And there's a general tendency, from my experience, to really be willing to have that dialogue, share the experience, and walk away from it a better group of people. So I think that's something we should really encourage and put some effort into.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to throw a question to the panel?
The recent Optus data breach, how would that look in Estonia? How would it play out? What the
Okay, so the question is, how would the Optus breach look any different? I think it's probably for your benefit, Urmas, since I'm going to throw this question to you. I don't know if you've studied this particular attack, but what did come out of that was that Optus was apparently retaining quite a lot of personal identity documentation in their system, and I believe the hack came through a retail sales portal, and we were able to extract personal identity documentation through that system. So while I could answer that question, I think I might throw to Urmas, who's closer to the action on that question.
Yeah, I don't know about details, and I think I even found out more about it here during this week, but which is for me in that sense very sad to hear, because the mobile operators themselves treat this kind of information like tier 3 protected or something like that, so that it should be like a top-notch security on that kind of data, and still like rather easily stolen. So kind of shocking, but I hope that it's kind of ringing bell to other operators as well to really look through your security measures, and are all these layers of security what they have mentioning at least publicly, that don't worry, that our core functions are like protected several layers, that yeah, it is actually true, but yeah.
So I'll just add that one of the big differences that you would see in Estonia is that Estonia has a centralised identity system that then protects decentralised infrastructure. So the consequence of that is that your identity, you don't need the 100-point check that we have here. Instead, you go through the central citizenship register, effectively the identity register, and the carrier doesn't need to know the details. It just needs to know whether or not you satisfy their criteria for being a customer. So it's quite a different approach. And in addition, when your data is accessed, that's actually flagged in the identity register. So the concept of for example, a freedom of information program in Estonia, generally that's marked quite poorly until you realise that it's actually built in by design. So you don't need it, right? When your data is accessed, you have the log that allows you to see that. And you can inquire, and there are legal requirements to respond, and legal ramifications if we don't like your answer. So it's quite a different environment. It's quite inconceivable that that sort of data breach would happen in the Estonian ecosystem, even across the private-public boundary between government and private sector.
I would add actually that I think it's a good example that when we have our German colleague, I think one is here as well, maybe can verify that one, but he was basically saying that in his so-called ID card, he has, I don't know how tall he is, basically all these personal data, but in our ID card, it's basically our personal ID code. And whatever information is needed is actually pulled from different databases and built together depending who is actually requiring that kind of information. Is it police who needs to verify that I have the driving license? Is this car registered to me, and can I just drive this car? So yeah, this centralization, I believe, is one of the keys here.
Okay.
I might just add that my personal belief is Australia's at a bit of a transition point in terms of threat. We've been very fortunate to be a little bit off the grid, so to speak, in the past. And there's increasing commercial drivers now that will come into play that I hope will lift the standard of cybersecurity across the country. Obviously, in the case of somewhere like Estonia, the threat has been there in different guise for quite some time, and that will inevitably lead. We heard about the 50% investment. I can assure you that's not the case in Australia. So I think
I
has
should
a
point out that
significant
that's
difference.
50%, I think, of the defence budget as opposed to the entire GDP.
No, I
but,
understand, but it's still a significantly different way of looking at the problem. So I hope that will change, but obviously there's commercial drivers involved in this that we're seeing in Parliament, etc., different, I guess, regulatory schemes coming into place, and that will hopefully with time, and also some changes in the way that we think about cybersecurity lead to an enhanced security posture.
Okay, so we have a question.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen Burgess. I'm the manager of the Defence and Security Institute here at the University of Adelaide. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the presentation and thank you for sharing with us what you do in Estonia. That was really enlightening, and particularly the decentralisation of information. So how do other countries transition to that? I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts on perhaps legislation in regards to cybersecurity levels within industry, perhaps mandating certain requirements across other areas in a pathway to get there and make sure that people actually step up and start to move in that direction. Thank you.
Great question. Who wants to take this one?
I might just mention there is a initiative that's been probably going for about the last 4 or 5 years, which is actually around the decentralisation of data across all the federal government in Australia. It's been started by CSIRO initially in the previous federal government. That's continuing to operate. It's an open GitHub project and so forth. Financially focused initially, but would eventually be applicable and rolled out across all industry, including utilities and so forth as well. So I think that's our first foot into that environment, and that's very similar to the extracting only what's required at the time required, rather than having access to all and needing to retain that information. So at least there's a partial initiative there as we move forward here.
I'll have a comment in a minute, but I'm going to give anyone else. Kristel, do you want to address? No, you don't have to. That's right.
No. Yeah. Yeah. I think just an example about all the data related, maybe also related to the previous question, is that really you can when we're talking about personal data, my data. So I can say who can see it. But also a good example is that some data is actually very open. For example, if I would like to check if Urmas has driving license, then I just have to know his birth date, and that's it. I can check if he can drive a car. So this is the kind of information that is available that is actually not affecting anyone. But I can just, for example, this is good for a business that is dealing with renting a car or something like that. They can very easily check that kind of information, and that enables them to actually very quickly say, okay, you're okay, you can go with the car. So, and this is what I enjoy very much, that not everything is closed.
I might just try and actually address the specific question, which is how do other countries get on board? I'll start by how we don't do that, which is that a turnkey solution from Estonia is a very difficult way of doing things, because really there's a foundation that's often missing from that technology part, and that's trust. The notion that you trust the government with your data is a very difficult hurdle, and it begins negatively by saying, let's introduce, let's say Australia card, so that we can track the abuse of welfare payments, for example. Now, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is we're going to impose an identity on you so that we can control our money. And of course, what's missing is what's in it for you, the citizen. The second level, we almost got there, was if we gather your data in one place through a coherent identity, then we can apply big data analytics and therefore target our resources towards the community in better ways. It's like, great, yes, but what's in it for me, right? the idea that the identity card allows you to assert your own ownership and control over your own private data and have oversight how that data is used means that we now address the question of what's in it for you, the citizen, right? And that's the underpinning of the Estonian ecosystem. It does come with the caveat that as a consequence, it's actually not very good for big data analytics, for directing resources where you need them, because that decentralization makes that unfit for that sort of purpose. But it does mean that as the citizen, you learn to trust because you have oversight over your data by the government. So that's one of the underpinnings that you need. And the second underpinning, and I mentioned this, of course, of that decentralization. Now, we can sell you a turnkey solution called X-Road, which is fantastic, except that you've now got to integrate that into the legacy systems that you have. So one of the great advantages that Estonia had in 1991-92 is that effectively they were starting from scratch. So it was a greenfields bureaucracy. You can't afford a paper budget or a paper bureaucracy, so you have to go digital. And so that actually presented, in a perverse way, an opportunity. And so identity, and the identity card, we use an identity chip, right? It's just the same technology you have in a credit card. We might use something else these days, but even when we found, in fact, one of the PhD students at Tartu University discovered that there was a flaw in the way in which the key pairs had been calculated, resulted almost immediately in the entire system being shut down for about a week until a patch was then identified and then rolled out over the air so that the system would work again. And that's part of the power. So I think the answer to your question is you need to start by really clearly explaining that this is about empowering you, the individual, to take control and have oversight over your own data, and then demonstrating that that's actually what you're doing and build that trust. Once you have that in play, then you can start, and that's not an easy thing to do.
I would add personally what I like most actually is that they have kind of philosophy, or the government is having a philosophy that once the data you already, or is it something that when you have already something asked, then you shouldn't ask it once again. So basically every data which will be stored somewhere in governmental databases, then all the rest of the agencies who need that kind of data is just querying from there, and they shouldn't ask it again from me. So this is my personal win out from that as well.
Yep. Go on here first, and then we've actually got a couple of questions online as well.
Oh, fantastic.
I was just going to say, it sounds like in addition to the heightened level of trust in government, that there might need to be a more sophisticated level of technological awareness, I guess, among the population. Is that true as well?
I can answer that question, but I'll throw that to whoever wants to.
Yeah, definitely. And we had in the beginning of 90s, we had the Tiger Leap, that kind of program, where we really supported and motivated people to go with the with digital revolution, should to say, and there were so many nice educational programs to really support that. All the schools got full classes of computers, and I think this initiated that kind of really big digital revolution in Estonia.
Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, I might just add to that quickly the education of boards in a corporate sense, and also the expectations of society and customers, I think are two of the key parts of this as well, because government regulation is fine, but it also can stifle innovation and do lots of negative impacts. What you really want are well-educated boards that understand how to balance the risk and can drive forward the right measures. And part of that is that they're held to account by their customers and by society. So that's where the education across society and expectation is a really important part of this, I think.
So I'll make two observations about that. The first is that Estonia, being a very small nation, has always been a public-private arrangement in developing these innovations. The second observation I'd make is that part of the Tiger Leap was actually targeted at the older end of the population. And they're some of the biggest users, the most enthusiastic users of the digital government interaction, because now you don't need to go out in the minus 35 degree icy weather and line up to get your driver's license. It's all done online. So perhaps perversely, it's actually the older generation that's driven that tech revolution. I have a question.
Yeah, there's a question online, so I'll ask it on behalf of from Chris Nurse online. What's the panel's view on whether we have enough cyber talent in Australia for the increasingly complex cyber defences that we're going to need?
I think I need to throw that to Dave and Derek. Do you want to? Derek, right? Derek, if you like.
No, we haven't. Full stop. But I suppose I've got a cynical view. It's not just cyber anymore. You need to understand what the business is, what you're trying to protect, know how stuff works, and then apply the cyber to it. So it's a broader conversation we need to be having, and then that reflects on the communication and likewise the training and education process that we're now introducing. It's no longer generic. It's not just you know cyber or you know IT. Because it's so prolific across technology, business, international comms and all the rest of it, needs to be embedded within the business now. So when I hire and going out and talking to clients and so forth, we hire people that actually know business and also the technology, how stuff works, look for controls, look for what good looks like, know how what bad looks like and so forth. And that's the applicable student or the applicable staff member that actually makes more of a difference. So I think we're moving away from a checklist-based society, standards-based, specifically standards from a checklist perspective, to more risk-based. We also need to be moving into more the business awareness and how stuff and what those weak bellies of the businesses actually are. And then that should be the cyber people we employ in those positions.
So I'm sure you have an opinion, Dave.
Always. I agree. I have a slightly divergent view, though, in the sense that I believe that we could have the trained talent that we need if the investment's there, and that it is a lagging thing. Like, you get trained people that after the investment. I hear all the time people saying we don't have enough trained people, but at the same time I don't see the investment to develop them, and therefore you're not going to have the number of trained people you need. So I think that's a really critical part of the conversation. Noting that at the same time, you're not going to magically get them. So there is that lag.
I'm going to make an observation there with my TalTech professor hat on, and then I might throw over to Kristel. One of the challenges we have in Estonia is there's no shortage of applicants to go into a Masters in Cybersecurity program. The challenge we have is they get snapped up so quickly by industry that often they don't complete their thesis, because they go, right, we've done the coursework, now I've got a job now, I'll get to the thesis later, and of course they never do. And that's a huge challenge for us. Part of the purpose of the collaboration between Adelaide and TalTech is to bring that research focus into a university that is really scrambling to, in Estonia, to deliver the numbers and the skills into industry, because they see the value of the coursework, Masters by coursework, but the thesis side, which is really what you need to have to be able to sustain through research the ongoing commitment to new innovation, is something that we're struggling with, because the students that we deliver are in such high demand so fast. So it's a discussion we had with the ambassador who was here on Monday and the Vice Chancellor here at the University of Adelaide as to how we might collaborate better in delivering better outcomes and leveraging both the hot experience that Estonia has and the research capability that the University of Adelaide has, to try and bridge that gap at the top end. And that's not even the immediate need for training and deployment of if you like, the troops at the cyber front end. Kristel, did you want to add?
Yeah. Yes, but not only even students, but also if we are talking about bachelor and master level, but also PhD students, postdocs, even professors, we are not attractive enough because the industry is more attractive, and we do not have them enough. We do not have enough people in the field, and therefore I'm really happy that we have the industry PhD program, which allows actually to collaborate and have these people working with real cases in industry and in the same time doing their PhDs.
So I might throw that observation to Urmas because, of course, the NATO CCDCoE is one of those industry partners, and indeed of the 10 students that we have over here this week from Estonia, 5 of you are linked to the centre. So, Urmas, how does that play into the role of the centre?
It fits very well in that sense that the main idea is actually that the people will be sent to us, that they will be educating themselves, getting new colleagues, connections, and so on and so forth. So then, yeah, the master studies, PhD studies fits very well. The only can be like a problematic thing is that usually the tour of duty is like 3 years. So the PhD takes maybe a little bit longer, but still we have some colleagues who can then has shown that they can continue studying at TalTech as well. And so on. Yeah. Fits very well.
Okay.
Thank you. I suspect that Estonia must have much lower levels of identity theft, but do you have any identity theft, and how's it handled by the ID system?
Yeah, I think there hasn't been like a very serious cases, I believe. I think some low-level cases are more like someone is actually, I don't know, finding an older person and saying that, okay, maybe you can borrow your ID card, and okay, maybe you can share the pins as well to identify and give some signatures and that kind of stuff. But this is kind of like a very minor things, as Matthew already mentioned as well, that okay, if you really want to sell your flat or something like that, you need to show up as well into physically, and then that kind of frauds are not happening. But yeah, someone is losing the money and that kind of stuff, yes, can happen, but nothing really serious. At least from the media, you can't hear serious things.
I think to answer that question very clearly, the usual sort of individual frauds, the phishing schemes still work to some extent, but the mass data breaches don't in that regard, not in the same way. In that ecosystem, of course, they work across other cloud systems that aren't linked to the Estonian identity system, but it's we don't see those stories happening. And in a country that, number one, is when there's a breach, you report, right? That's part of the best practice that's long been part of the environment.
We've got another question online, if you'd like one.
Sure.
So the question online, again from Chris, is what are the panel's view on emerging concerns on quantum resistant encryption standards?
Urmas, do you want to take that?
Yeah, this is one of the topics we are working on, yes, and obviously the competences what we have at the center is heavily depending what kind of persons the nations are sending to us. But nevertheless, we have very good colleague from South Korea, who has a colleague in South Korea who knows quite a lot about quantum computing. And yeah, we are doing some research on that area, and at the same time, of course, we know that our neighbor is trying to collect as much as possible encrypted data so that one day all to decrypt this information. So we know the problem. Yeah, I think from our website you can also, if not yet, then during this year you can get some materials as well, what we have been studying, and yeah, we have definitely this one of the areas where there is a concern, and trying to work on that.
Yeah, so as was just described, the problem already exists in that we're already transmitting data in an encrypted form that isn't necessarily quantum resistant, so that at a future date that data could be viewed. Obviously that depends on the lifespan of that data, but on the assumption that you've got certain bits of data that might have 10 or 20 years life, and at some point in that period of time quantum computing at scale becomes a reality, then that data is potentially exposed. So to me, this is again about education. It's about actually taking efforts now for a future problem. NIST has undertaken, in the US has undertaken a lot of research into quantum resistant encryption, and that is something that organisations at a larger scale should be looking at now, so that we're actually ready, and certainly governments are. But it's definitely a current problem for the future, if that makes sense.
I totally agree. One thing that we're seeing a lot more is data sharding. So similar to what we were talking about with either a blockchain system or other systems across multiple chains or multiple repositories, and sharding that data across to make it harder to, if it was broken, to be able to get the underlying data. And also data sharding, which is the complete data set being available if it was cracked in a single stream. So if it is in the future and it was only pulled off of one channel or one path rather than the entire repository, then you're only getting part of the story. So that's also a bit of a movement at the moment to fill in this gap before we get to the end, which is really resilient encryption over the longer term.
I might add though, the challenge is that there's still a lot of places struggling with any encryption. Or sustaining their systems in a secure manner. So there's a balancing act here between trying to push so that we're resilient for the future, whilst also just getting the basic hygiene and basics right. It's easy to jump to the future quantum problem when in some cases we aren't even encrypting the data we have, and some of the breaches are an example of that. If that data was managed and encrypted and done in a particular way, we might not have had the size of the breach we did.
I'm glad you mentioned cyber hygiene, because in fact it's a hot topic and has been a hot topic in Estonia for some time. One of the companies, and I won't mention their name, but Cybexa might recognise their own name. Sorry, I just did that, didn't I? Actually run a cyber hygiene program that is used by all of government, and I particularly like it because as a training style, it doesn't tell you what's right or wrong. It asks you what you would do and why. And what you get reported back is, here are your vulnerabilities. As an organisation, you get a whole of organisation view of where your vulnerabilities lie, as well as you can then segment, the different sectors within your organisation. And that allows you to target then your responses to that particular problem. The other thing I really like about it is because you have an open-ended question area where people can either rant or point out that actually this is a different problem than what you think. It actually gives you insight into the thinking. So that's long been a part of the ecosystem there. And so, we talk about quantum computing as the future, but yes, we're also dealing with the present, and the present is not all about tech, it's mostly about human behaviour. Do we have another question?
I would add actually that maybe from the current perspective, I believe people are even worried about data integrity, in that sense that if you have the data set, you have medical data, then you are concerned that, okay, if one thing is just stealing your data, but if someone will manipulate that one, if they will change your blood type, and then you will be in big trouble, actually. You can get killed for that. So I believe the blockchain is here playing a big role, that again is data integrity, that if something is changed, you will know about it.
Yeah, and getting killed, but also maybe when you're applying for driving license or extending your driving license, can you pre-fill a questionnaire in your person database, and if there is something wrong, that you have some sort of problem, then you just do not get license or whatever license to do something or to get hired by someone. So this is the main problem, yes.
All right, I just wanted to switch to more of a finite resource, which is people. So you got a population of 1.3 million, even with 50% of the defence budget and a major focus on education in cyber. I'm just wondering how you scale up for two, especially given two recent world events. One, COVID obviously interrupting immigration, as we know the impact of that in Australia, particularly skilled immigration. I'm sure it's the same for Estonia. And then obviously you've now got a major physical conflict in the region, of which cyber also plays, cyber defence plays a major part. So with that finite resource you've got, how do you scale up to keep ahead?
So thanks, I have a very interesting question. I'll start by just acknowledging that Estonia is very much a supporter of Ukraine in the conflict with Russia, and has accepted a very large number of refugees, and both into the country but also through. This creates logistical challenges, but it's not creating significant, if you like, civil unrest, because we get it, and we understand and support. With that comment, who wants to address this?
I could actually give my thoughts about that one. That of course what COVID actually showed very well in that sense that you don't need to physically be present all the time. So you can have very talented persons working for you from the distance as well. So I believe this is kind of one of the things I think that it's kind of solving a little bit at least our problem that yeah, our population is small, the students coming out from university, yeah, the numbers are very low, but still we can see that quite many persons from different countries are working for us. So yeah.
I'd say there's three parts. So there's the people, process, and technology. People obviously are essential to this, but we have to remember that cyberspace is also largely about computers, and there is no reason that the process and the technology can't be used to a greater extent to help solve the problem. Obviously, because of cyberspace, every time you implement a new technology, you often create a new problem. But I've been in many security operations centres where we have multiple people looking at multiple screens, manually going through logs, when there's no reason for that. The technologies exist to support those people. And there is a tendency, because it's simpler, to just say, well, we'll chuck another 3 people in the room, give them a computer, and problem solved. But of course, all you've done is push the problem further downstream. So I would argue, again, it's about having a strategy and putting the pieces together. But people are still very important. I'm not diminishing that. It's just there's more than one way of solving these problems, and throwing lots of people at it isn't necessarily the solution, in my opinion.
Any other comments on that question?
Look, I'll just reinforce what you've just said, but also the earlier comment around we need to understand and actually invest in the problem. I'm not sure we really care too much. You know, I still get clients that come to me, and I see it in the industry every day, where someone won't fix a bit of encryption up or fix a vulnerability up until it's been exploited. They finally realise that they're exposed. We're not doing enough proactive work, and likewise, we're not investing in understanding what the business processes are and also the underlying technologies that are used. And we've talked around it a few times, but supply chain. We're a very interconnected and dependent organisation. Businesses today and also as a society, we need to understand where our weaknesses really are and take responsibility for where your product or your service is either coming from or going to. And I don't think we do anywhere near that type of understanding around business anymore.
So I think we might wrap up the panel at this point. There was so much more that we could have talked about. The startup ecosystem is a fascinating topic for another day, apparently. online voting, the use of blockchain to protect the e-government ecosystem, which I didn't even mention until now. It's been around longer than Bitcoin. So there's so many things that we could also have talked about. But I might hand over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Matthew, and help me thank the panel as they go back to their seats.